He was 60, she was 25, but this is how it ended. William sat on his porch one late summer afternoon, the kind of day when the golden light poured down gently across the garden, touching every leaf, every faded flower with a soft, forgiving glow. He was 62 years old now, retired from decades of steady work at a manufacturing plant, and his house in the suburbs had become both a haven and a prison. From the outside, his life seemed perfectly ordinary. Neighbors waved to him, admired his neatly trimmed lawn, and sometimes envied the apparent peace of his retirement. Yet inside, William carried a heart tangled in longing, regret, and a secret that weighed heavier with every passing day. His wife, Margaret, bustled in the kitchen behind him. She had been his companion for over 30 years, a woman practical to her core with a no-nonsense tone that had once grounded him but now often felt like a cold anchor. Their marriage had survived the years not because of romance or passion but because of routine. William respected her, admired her resilience, but love, the kind that quickens the pulse and warms the heart, had long disappeared from their lives. The silence of their evenings often pressed down on William. Margaret would watch her shows, William would sit with his newspaper or gaze outside. They rarely fought anymore, instead they simply drifted in separate orbits under the same roof. It was in this quiet emptiness that William's heart had begun searching for something more, something that both scared him and made him feel alive again. That something more had arrived in the form of Margaret's friend's daughter, Anna. She was in her early 30s, vivacious, with laughter that filled a room and a presence that reminded William of everything he thought he had lost with age. Anna had begun visiting often, helping her mother, who was Margaret's closest friend, and sometimes stopping by William's house as well. At first, William told himself that his fascination was nothing but admiration for youth, for energy, for the beauty of life he no longer carried. But the more time he spent around her, the more that admiration turned into longing. Anna had an ease about her, unburdened by the weight of years and regrets. She asked William questions about his past, about his work, about his dreams. Nobody had asked him about dreams in decades. He found himself smiling more when she was around, telling stories he hadn't thought about in years, reliving moments of his youth through her curious eyes, and Anna, perhaps unknowingly, encouraged this. She laughed at his jokes, touched his arm lightly when he spoke, and listened in a way that made him feel not like an old man but simply like a man. But William wasn't the only one who noticed Anna's brightness. Younger men, neighbors, family, friends, even strangers seemed drawn to her. She had the effortless glow of someone who didn't yet realize how much power she carried in her smile. William often watched, torn between admiration and jealousy, as she chatted with men closer to her own age. The logical part of him whispered, of course she would prefer them. What could you possibly offer her? Yet his heart, foolish and stubborn, clung to the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she saw him differently. The conflict within William grew heavier. On one side was his loyalty to Margaret, a woman who had built a life with him, who had raised a son with him, who had stood by him in both lean years and better ones. On the other side was this fierce yearning, this reminder that he was still alive, that passion did not have to die simply because one turned 60. Margaret, sharp as she was, began to notice the shift in William. He was livelier when Anna visited, more attentive, even dressing with more care on days he knew she might stop by. Margaret's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing at first. Her silence was worse than anger, it was suspicion left to grow in the shadows. The situation reached a turning point one autumn evening. Anna had come by to bring her mother a basket of groceries and had stopped at William's house on her way. Margaret was out with church friends and William invited Anna inside for tea. They sat in the living room, the quiet ticking of the clock filling the spaces between their words. Anna asked him about his youth, about whether he had ever wanted to travel, and William found himself confessing dreams he had buried decades ago, dreams of seeing Europe, of painting, of writing. She listened with wide eyes, and when he paused, she reached over and touched his hand. The touch was innocent perhaps, but to William it was electricity. His heart raced, and for the first time in years he felt the dizzy rush of being wanted, of being alive. He knew it was wrong, knew the path ahead was dangerous, yet he also knew he couldn't simply push away what had awakened inside him. It was then that Margaret walked through the door earlier than expected. She saw them, Anna's hand resting lightly on William's flushed face, and though no words were spoken, the air in the room grew sharp with unspoken accusation. From that night forward, the fragile balance of their lives began to crack. Margaret grew colder, her suspicions sharper. William, torn between guilt and desire, found himself trapped in a storm of his own making. Anna, perhaps unaware of the depth of his feelings, continued to treat him with warmth, only intensifying the fire within him. What followed was a series of choices, some small, some monumental, that would change William's life forever. He could cling to duty and routine, bury his feelings, and live out his years in quiet resignation. Or he could risk everything, his marriage, his reputation, his peace, for the chance at something he hadn't felt in decades: love. The days that followed Margaret's sudden discovery carried a tension so thick it seemed to hang in every corner of the house. William tried to maintain the old routines: coffee in the morning, the newspaper spread neatly on the table, the quiet evenings with the television humming in the background. But Margaret was no longer the same. She spoke little, watched him closely, and when their eyes met, hers carried a storm he could not decipher fully. Suspicion, hurt, perhaps even anger she was too proud to express. William told himself that nothing had really happened. Anna had touched his hand innocently, he believed, and yet the look on Margaret's face that night had branded the moment into something more dangerous. The truth was that William's heart had already crossed a line, even if his actions had not. He couldn't deny it anymore. He longed for Anna, and that longing colored every interaction he had with both women. One Saturday afternoon, Margaret's friend invited them both over for a small gathering. William tried to decline, but Margaret insisted, her voice sharp with unspoken challenge. "We're going," she said firmly. Her eyes locked on his. It felt less like an invitation and more like a trial. When they arrived, Anna was there, her laughter filling the kitchen, her hair catching the light as she moved gracefully between guests. William's chest tightened. He tried to avoid staring, but his eyes betrayed him. Anna greeted him warmly, as she always did, and Margaret noticed every glance, every twitch of his mouth. The evening became unbearable. Younger men gathered around Anna, their youthful confidence shining in their jokes and playful remarks. William stood in the corner, a glass of wine in his hand, watching with both admiration and annoying jealousy. He felt foolish, invisible, and yet unable to tear himself away. When Anna finally drifted over to him, asking gently if he was enjoying himself, William's heart leapt. He mumbled something about being tired, and she smiled, touching his arm briefly before moving on. The touch lingered longer than it should have, and Margaret's gaze burned into his back. That night, after they returned home, Margaret broke the silence. "Do you think I don't see it?" she asked quietly, her voice trembling not with weakness but with restrained fury. William froze. "See what?" he asked, though the lie tasted bitter on his tongue. "The way you look at her," Margaret said. "The way you change when she's around. Do you think I've been blind all these years? I know you, William. I know when your heart is somewhere else." He opened his mouth, but no words came. The silence between them said everything. Margaret turned away, her shoulders stiff. "You're a fool," she whispered, and walked into the bedroom, leaving him standing alone in the living room, feeling older and more broken than ever. For days afterward, William wandered in a fog of guilt and defiance. Part of him wanted to throw himself at Margaret's feet to beg forgiveness, to promise he would never think of Anna again. But another part, stubborn, hungry, alive, refused to let go of the feeling Anna stirred within him. That part told him that Margaret had never really understood him, not the way Anna seemed to. That part whispered that life was short, and love, real love, was worth any risk. It was during one of his solitary walks through the park that William's thoughts turned darkest. He imagined a life where he left Margaret, where he confessed his feelings to Anna, and somehow, impossibly, she returned them. He pictured late nights filled with laughter, adventures he had never taken, a second youth stolen from the jaws of old age. And yet, even as he imagined it, he felt the sharp sting of reality. Anna might not feel the same. To her, he might be nothing more than a kind old man, someone to listen to her stories, someone safe. One evening, unable to resist, William found himself dialing Anna's number. His hand shook as he held the phone. When she answered, her voice was bright and his chest tightened. "Anna, it's me," he said softly. "I was wondering if you'd like to have coffee sometime, just to talk." There was a pause, short but heavy, then she replied, "Of course, William, that would be nice." They met at a small cafe downtown, the kind of place with warm lights and the smell of roasted beans hanging thick in the air. William felt nervous, almost boyish, as he sat across from her. They talked about books, about travel, about her hopes for the future. Anna confessed that she sometimes felt lost, unsure of what she wanted in life. William listened intently, offering words of encouragement, and when she looked at him with gratitude, his heart soared. But then, as the conversation deepened, Anna said something that pierced him. "I admire you, William. You remind me of the father I wish I'd had, steady, kind, wise. You're someone I feel safe with." The words, meant as praise, fell on William like a stone. Safe, a father figure, not a man to be loved passionately, but a man to be leaned on. He forced a smile, nodding, but inside his heart ached. That night, William sat in his study long after Margaret had gone to bed. He stared at the old photographs on the wall, his wedding picture, his son as a child, the vacations they had taken together. His life had been ordinary, yes, but it had been real. And here he was, throwing it into chaos for a dream that might never be his. Yet even with the pain of Anna's words echoing in his mind, he couldn't stay away. The meetings continued, short walks, coffees, chance encounters that Margaret grew increasingly suspicious of. William told himself they were harmless, but the truth was that every moment with Anna deepened his desire. The breaking point came one winter evening when Margaret confronted him again. "I can't live like this," she said, her voice hard. "If you want her, then go, but don't stand here pretending you're still my husband." William looked at her, at the lines on her face carved by years of shared struggles, and he felt both pity and resentment. "I don't know what I want," he admitted, his voice raw. "All I know is that I feel alive when she's around, and with you, I don't feel anything anymore." Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but she did not let them fall. "Then you've already made your choice," she whispered. She turned and walked away, leaving William alone in the silence that now felt like a punishment he had brought upon himself. Winter dragged on like a sentence, each gray morning colder than the one before. William felt as though he was living two lives. In one, he was still Margaret's husband, moving through their house in silence, exchanging clipped words about bills and groceries, pretending the fracture between them wasn't widening every day. In the other, he was a man desperate for connection, grasping at every chance to be near Anna, even when the meetings left him more tormented than satisfied. The secrecy ate at him. He wasn't truly hiding an affair, nothing physical had happened between him and Anna, but the emotions were more dangerous than touch. He craved her attention, replayed every word she spoke, every look she gave him, searching for signs of affection that might not even exist. Margaret was no fool. She didn't shout, didn't accuse. Instead, she wielded silence like a blade. She cooked his meals, did the laundry, sat beside him in church, all while radiating a quiet fury. William found her silence harder to bear than anger. He almost wished she would scream, break a dish, demand an end to it all, but she didn't. And so he sat, suffocating in guilt, yet unwilling to let go of the ember that Anna had lit inside him. It was during this bleak season that their son, Jack, came to visit. Jack was 35, busy with his own career and rarely had time to spend at home. Margaret greeted him warmly, grateful for the company, but William felt exposed, as though Jack might somehow see through him. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Jack noticed the tension. "What's going on with you two?" he asked, his fork pausing midair. "Nothing," Margaret said quickly. William forced a smile. "Your mother's just tired, we're fine." But Jack's eyes narrowed. He had inherited Margaret's intuition, sharp and unrelenting. "You don't look fine." Later that night, after Margaret had gone to bed, Jack cornered his father in the living room. "Dad," he said quietly, "is there something you need to tell me?" William hesitated. He wanted to confess everything, to unburden himself, to share the storm raging inside him, but he couldn't bring himself to say the words. Instead, he shook his head. "It's nothing, son, just life catching up with me." Jack didn't look convinced, but he let it go. William knew it was only a matter of time before the truth seeped through the cracks. The breaking point came not from Margaret, not from Jack, but from Anna herself. They had met again for coffee, the same warm cafe that had become their refuge. William arrived early, nerves gnawing at him. When Anna walked in, bundled in her winter coat, he felt that familiar rush. They talked as always about her work, her frustrations, her dreams, but there was a heaviness in her tone. At last, she sighed. "William, can I be honest with you?" "Of course," he said, leaning forward. "You've become very important to me," she began slowly. "You're someone I can talk to about anything, but lately I've felt like you want something more, and I don't know if I can give you that." Her words struck him like a slap. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "I care about you," Anna continued gently, "but not in the way you might hope. You're special to me, but you remind me of family, not a partner." The words family and not a partner echoed in his ears like a verdict. He nodded, his throat tight. "I understand," he managed to whisper. But he didn't understand, not fully, because even as she spoke, he saw the warmth in her eyes, felt the softness of her smile, and his heart refused to believe her rejection completely. That night, William returned home shattered. Margaret noticed the slump of his shoulders, the defeat in his expression, but she said nothing. He poured himself a drink, then another, sinking into the armchair like a man twice his age. The fire that Anna had sparked was still burning, but now it was consuming him. In the weeks that followed, William oscillated between obsession and despair. Some days he told himself he would move on, repair his marriage, accept the life he had. Other days he found himself walking past Anna's office, hoping for a glimpse or composing messages he never sent. His world had narrowed to a single point, the ache of wanting something he could not have. One evening, after yet another silent dinner, Margaret finally broke. She stood at the sink, her back to him, her voice trembling with both anger and grief. "Do you think I don't know?" she asked. William looked up from his plate. "Know what?" "That you're in love with her," Margaret said, turning to face him. Her eyes shone with unshed tears. "You don't have to say it. I see it in everything you do, and I can't live in this house with a man who loves someone else." William's chest tightened. He wanted to deny it to soothe her, but the truth pressed too heavily on him. "I don't know what I feel," he admitted. "All I know is that I'm lost." Margaret's face hardened. "Then find yourself somewhere else." The ultimatum hung in the air, cold and sharp. For the first time in decades, William slept in the guest room. The following days were chaos. Jack, sensing the fracture, demanded answers. Margaret gave him enough truth to confirm his suspicions, and Jack confronted his father. The confrontation was brutal. "You're 62 years old," Jack shouted, "and you're throwing away Mom, our family, for a fantasy with someone half your age. Do you realize how pathetic this looks?" William flinched at the word pathetic. He wanted to defend himself, to argue that this wasn't about appearances but about the desperate search for meaning, for passion, for life. But Jack's fury was a mirror, reflecting all the shame William already felt. "Grow up, Dad," Jack said bitterly before walking out. William sat alone, the silence heavier than ever. He had wanted to feel alive, but instead he felt more broken, more isolated than at any other time in his life. And yet, even then, he couldn't let go of Anna. He replayed her words, searching for hidden meanings, convincing himself that maybe, one day, she might see him differently. It was a delusion, and he knew it, but it was all he had left. The storm had reached its peak. William's marriage was crumbling, his relationship with his son fractured, his dignity eroded, and still, his heart clung to an impossible dream. Spring came late that year, as though even the seasons hesitated to move forward. For William, every day felt like a slow unraveling. The house, once filled with quiet routines, now echoed with absence. Margaret had gone to stay with her sister, leaving him alone with his thoughts. Jack had stopped calling, his disappointment a wound William carried silently. And Anna had gently pulled away, answering his messages less frequently, always with polite distance. At first, William clung to denial. He told himself Margaret would return, that Jack would forgive him, that Anna might someday change her mind. But as the days stretched into weeks, reality settled on him like the heavy dust that gathered on unused shelves. He was alone, not because of fate, but because of choices he had made, choices born of longing and pride. One evening he wandered into the old study, a room cluttered with forgotten hobbies. He pulled open a drawer and found a sketchbook he had once used in his youth. The pages were yellowed, the drawings amateurish, but they stirred something in him. He remembered a time long before marriage and fatherhood when he had dreamed of being an artist. That dream had been buried under bills, responsibilities, and the grind of factory work. But here it was, waiting quietly in the dust. For the first time in months, William felt a flicker of peace. He picked up a pencil and began to sketch. His hands trembled at first, clumsy from decades of disuse, but soon the lines began to flow. He sketched the garden, the old oak tree outside, even the wrinkles on his own hands. It wasn't art for anyone else, it was simply a way to remind himself that he still existed beyond his mistakes. The act of drawing became his refuge. He spent hours bent over the sketchbook, sometimes losing track of time entirely. The loneliness remained, but it softened, replaced by a quiet sense of creation. When Margaret called one evening, her voice distant but calm, he felt stronger than he had in weeks. "We need to talk," she said. They met at a small diner halfway between his house and her sister. Margaret looked tired. Her face lined not just with age but with sorrow. She stirred her coffee slowly before speaking. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she admitted, "but I also don't want to spend the rest of my life angry." William swallowed hard. "I was a fool," he said simply. "I chased something that was never mine to have, and I hurt you in the process. I can't undo it, but I can tell you that I regret it every day." Margaret studied him for a long moment. "Do you still love her?" William hesitated, then shook his head. "I loved what she represented, youth, possibility, the life I thought I missed, but it wasn't real, not in the way what we had was real." Tears filled Margaret's eyes, though she blinked them away. "What we had hasn't been real for a long time," she said softly. They sat in silence, the truth heavy between them. In the end, Margaret didn't promise reconciliation. She simply said, "I need time." And William, for once, didn't beg or plead. He simply nodded, knowing that time was the only gift he could offer her now. In the months that followed, William rebuilt slowly. He attended a local art class for retirees where he found unexpected companionship among people who, like him, carried regrets but still sought meaning. He learned to paint with watercolors to capture the fleeting beauty of flowers, of sunsets, of the small details he had once overlooked. It was in that class that he began to understand something profound. Life wasn't about reclaiming the passion of youth, but about discovering passion that fit the person he had become. He could not be 30 again, nor could he win the love of a woman who saw him as a father figure. But he could be 62, with a sketchbook in hand and a chance to create beauty out of the years still ahead. One afternoon, as he painted in the park, he spotted Anna across the lawn. She waved and walked over, her smile as warm as ever. "I haven't seen you in a while," she said. William smiled back, his heart no longer racing with desperation but steady with gratitude. "I've been busy," he said, holding up his sketchbook, "trying to remember who I am." Anna flipped through the pages, her eyes widening. "These are beautiful, William." He chuckled softly, "They're just practice, but thank you." They talked for a while about small things, the weather, her work, his art class. And when she left, William felt no ache, no longing, only a gentle fondness, the kind that didn't burn but warmed quietly. Later that evening, Margaret called again. Her voice was softer this time. "Would you like to have dinner tomorrow?" she asked. William felt a lump in his throat. "Yes," he said simply. The path forward was uncertain. Perhaps Margaret would forgive him, perhaps not. Perhaps Jack would one day understand, perhaps not. But for the first time in a long time, William wasn't chasing what might be. He was simply living moment by moment with the humility of a man who had lost much but still had time to make something meaningful. In the end, William's story wasn't about the love he thought he found in Anna, but about the love he rediscovered within himself, the love of creation, of truth, of the imperfect but real connections that remained. And as spring finally bloomed, he sat once again on his porch, sketchbook in hand, watching the golden light wash over the garden. He was older, wiser, scarred, but also in his own quiet way, free.